Good Shabbos. In this week's Parsha, Parshas Vayera, we have the story of Sarah finding out that she's going to have a child. And as the story unfolds and she hears that the angel says to Avram, her husband, that she's going to have a child, it says, Vatitzchak Sarah bekirba. Sarah laughs inwardly. God then comes to Avram and says, why is Sarah laughing? Hayipali me Hashem davar? Is it impossible for God to give someone a child? So Avram, it seems, approaches Sarah, and what does it say? Sarah lemar lo tzachachti. Sarah denies it and says, I did not laugh, because she was afraid. And Avram counters, no, vayomer lo ki tzachakt, you have laughed. So on the surface, this seems to be a tremendous flaw in Sarah, that she's willing to lie. She doesn't necessarily know she's lying to God. She might only be lying to Avram, her husband, but it's still inexcusable. And perhaps there's even more here, that she's not just lying that she laughed, it could be that she's lying to herself. Because if you read it carefully, it doesn't say that she laughed. It says, Vatischak Sarah bekirba, she laughed inwardly. And it's much easier to deny your inner feelings. But I think it might be interesting to sort of take a broader view of different stories in the book of Bereshit and see different types of lying and see how we deal with lying in general and how the stories unfold. So on the one level, you could start off with the lies that the brothers of Yosef lied to their father. What did they do? They took his coat, they soaked it in blood, and they said, do you recognize this piece of clothing of Yosef, your son? They never said that he got killed. They never said it's his blood. They suggested it. That's one level of lie. And we see that they regretted it later on in the story, and they're sort of exposed for their lies. And on the surface, it sounds like they even repented and regretted those actions, and somehow Yosef and his brothers end up living happily ever after. That's one level of lie. Another level of lie would be, I would say, this story of Sarah. She is lying, but she's lying and denying her inward feelings, her inner feelings. That's a lie, it's a denial, but it's something which is quite normal. Again, take her circumstances into account. She's 90 years old. She hears that she's going to have a child. She got used to the fact that she wasn't going to have a child, no matter how painful that was. And now all of a sudden she's being confronted with, no, maybe you're going to have a child again. And she doesn't know it's coming from God. As far as she knows, it's just some fellow on the street. The laughter seems to be normal. And when confronted with the fact that she's denying God being able to perform a miracle, she doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know what to say. And she says, no, I didn't laugh. Because on one hand, she has a tension here that she feels she's a believer in God and she accepts what God could do. But on the other hand, she didn't want to deal with her own emotions. So it's somewhat excusable, even though it might still be wrong. And the Torah doesn't seem to put a lot of weight into it. Sarah doesn't get punished for it. It just calls out her lie and calls out her denial. But it's somewhat understandable. The next level of lie, perhaps, would be Cain. He kills Hevel, his brother, and God comes to him and says, hey, where's your brother? And he says, Lo yadati, I don't know. Hashomer achi anochi, am I my brother's keeper? That's an outward lie. And that's a terrible lie, and especially when it's coupled with the fact that he murdered. But when God says no, the land is crying, the blood of your brother is crying out from the earth, which soaked it up. Cain answers, Gadol avonim, and so my sin is greater than I could bear. He comes clean. Okay, it's God. You could say it's different. He might not have come clean if it was a different situation. But even though he lies, and again, you could understand, he killed his brother in a fit of passion. He then, all of a sudden, God just surprised him and says, what happened? And the first thing that he comes to his mind is to lie. I think most of us could say we've lied under those circumstances, caught in a very in an embarrassing situation, in a terrible situation, without thinking it through first. The first thing that comes to your mind is to lie. So perhaps he lied, he regretted it, he's punished, he doesn't get killed, he doesn't get executed, but he goes into exile as a result of his lie. But again, that's a step up. It's not it's worse It's worse than what Yosef's brothers did. It's certainly worse than what Sarah did, but at least he admitted it. Just as an example of someone who tells the truth, in the beginning of the Torah, we have that the Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, eat from the tree of knowledge. And when God comes to Adam and he says, hey, did you eat from the tree? He says, why are you afraid? He gives him an opening. Why are you hiding from me? He says, I was afraid to see you, and I was embarrassed, because I am naked. And again, the nakedness could be taken literally, it could even take it metaphorically. In a sense, I realize my sin. And he says, did you eat from the tree which I told you not to eat? And he says, yes, my wife gave it to me and I ate. Okay, he's blaming it on his wife, but he's admitting exactly what happened. So in a sense, the first case of the possibility of lying when you're caught sinning, Adam comes clean, right? Cain, he does the opposite. He denies, but at least he covers for himself or repents and regrets it immediately when he realizes that he's been caught in his lie. Laughing internally, I think, is something we could all relate to, and suggesting, like the Yosef's brothers, it might be in that situation, it was a terrible thing that they did, but they didn't want to bring themselves to a lie. It's very interesting. They were willing to do whatever it was to Yosef, but they didn't come out straight out and lie to their father. There's some respect that they still had, and they wanted to, for people to feel that they still were truthful people and they wouldn't tell a lie. So the problem is, when you think about all these different types of lies, I think we could relate to all of them. We could relate to the idea of deniability. And the question is, how do we deal with it? And the reason it's on my mind this week is, the elections in the United States are still taking place. And we're faced with the fact that there are many, many, many lies out there. And the question is, when you look at those lies and the conspiracy theories and the fact that people believe things which are demonstrably false, there's no question about it, yet people are convinced that that's the truth. And in a sense, we don't have an example of this in all of the book of Bereshit. All the lies are lies which you could understand to a certain degree. You're in a fit of passion, you're embarrassed, there's many different reasons, but ultimately there's a recognition that it's a lie. Somehow we understand that it's a lie, it's wrong, and you have to change your ways. And I suppose the problem that I have today is I look around and I see that there are lies which are so clearly false, so clearly outright lies, and that it's not even by someone who has to lie in order to save his skin. Because people who don't need it, who don't have to save their skin, who are not doing it because they have to make sure that they survive in the political world or whatever world it is, but they're still willing to lie or accept a lie, that's quite troubling. And the only way I could address that, I suppose, is refer to a verse much later in the Torah where it says that you shouldn't take bribery, that a judge should not take a bribe. And it says, why? Because Hashochet Ya'aver Einei Tzadikim. Bribery blinds the eyes of the righteous. And really what it's saying is, you could have somebody who has the best intent in the world. But when you have some kind of reason why you feel you cannot admit the truth, because, for example, you took a bribe, the fellow gave you $100 under the table, or he just even maybe was nice to you when it wasn't necessary, and you feel, oh, I owe him hakaras hatov, I owe him appreciation, I have to now be thankful to him. All of a sudden it changes your view, because you're now very subjective. So you're not necessarily the guy whose life depends on it, but it might even been a small favor. And when you have a reason to believe something, what happens is we rationalize and we try to convince ourselves of the truth. And again, we're all guilty of that. We know that throughout our lives, we've rationalized and believed things that were clearly wrong because it just didn't fit in with our philosophy. It didn't fit in with our view of the world. It didn't fit in with what we needed at that moment. Even if it was a small thing, we're all guilty of it. The question is, what do we do with that guilt? What do we do with that recognition, I should say, of the fact that we lied? And I would like to propose that all of us have to realize that we are all guilty of accepting lies. We're all guilty of fooling ourselves. We're all guilty of being the recipients of some type of bribe or another, which clouds our vision and distorts our view of reality. But we have to pull ourselves back and try to look at things objectively, if not necessarily at the moment, perhaps after that moment, whether it's a week or two or a year later, and say, why did I did that? Go back to that argument that you had, or that business deal, or the discussion with a child or with a parent where you outright lied, and you kind of live with that all the time and sort of just rationalize it. Go back and say, hey, what really happened? What were my motivations? And we have to be able to do that. It's very difficult sometimes to be able to look in the past and deny the fact that we weren't righteous and admit the fact that we were liars and denying things which were true. But I think we always have to do that. We have to be able to be honest enough with ourselves to look back and say, hey, maybe I made a big mistake. Maybe I was just rationalizing. And you might still make that mistake again. You might do it again. But the more you take the time to look to your past, or hopefully even to the future, and say, what is the real motivation behind me accepting this as truth, or calling something else a lie, which we know is the truth? It will hopefully, in those times of introspection, those times when we're not in the heat of the moment, we'll be able to then to sort of create within ourselves a type of personality which knows how to step back and try to be as objective as possible. There's nobody who could be completely objective, because the truth is everybody takes some kind of bribe. Everything affects everybody in their life. It's very difficult to be objective. The goal is to be as objective as possible. The goal is to be able to look at ourselves, step back and look at ourselves as honestly as possible. And therefore, hopefully, we don't have that problem. And I didn't mention one other lie, which I meant to mention, is the lie of Yaakov. Yaakov comes to Yitzchak and he says, Ani Esav b'charecha. I am Esav, your firstborn. There is a clear lie. But again, the Torah doesn't seem to take him into account for that, because we say his motive is correct. And that adds another wrinkle, really, to what I'm saying, is that sometimes we have to maybe even consciously lie. We know Yaakov was consciously lying because he told his mother, hey, I'm going to get caught. So there is a point, and I apologize for going back and retracting some of what I said before, but there is sometimes a point of lying if you know that you're lying for the right reason, but you're aware of your lies. And that's what's important. That's why perhaps Yaakov is not really held responsible for that lie, because he did it because his mother told him, because he felt it was necessary. The story is not so clear why it's okay. But the assumption is that sometimes when you have the right motive and you're aware of your lies, that might even be somewhat okay. I mean, there are people who say you should never lie under any circumstance. But what's more important, and I think is consistent with what I've been saying until now, is that you have to be aware of what's motivating you. You have to be aware of what you're doing. If you're vatachachesh sar, like you deny it completely, and you're not in touch with your feelings, and you're not in touch with the reality, that's the most dangerous point that we could reach in our lives. And hopefully we all rise up and get past that level and be able to understand what the real truth is and really what our motivations are in life. Good Shabbos.